Right, hello. Another video on how to play into Ruby Sapphire. So just sort of general ruling on the Ruby Sapphire deck. I'll jump into that. Its entire game plan is it wants to ramp to its top end. It wants to ramp to the later ink stages of the game as quick as it can, so it can start doing its late game stuff. If you ever look at a Ruby Sapphire list, it's my blue steel list because we'll cover the blue steel matchup in a sec. Um, but it wants to ramp to the top end of the ink, the later steps of the game where all of its cards are. So all of its Tamatoas, its Dimes, its Be Prepared, its Big Sisus, Maleficent Big Dragons, all these things are just basically blocked for them as the game starts, and they want to achieve that ink score as quick as they can so they can start just playing them things out, controlling the board, and just winning on ink advantage. The fact that they just get to play bigger things and play more stuff than you. Of course, to achieve that, they make sure that they can't lose in turns 1 to 4 or, just very early on turns, but it does have to sacrifice those early turns and use them on things like ramp and card draw to replenish and to find more ways to ramp. So, of course, their game plan, perfect game plan, is that thing of play a Popsicle turn 1, turn 2, Tippo, get the Hiram or the Grandma Tyler out. Hiram tends to be better, either seeing how far I go or just find more ramp options, do a little bit of board controlling in between this stage, and then get to the late game stage where you've got Tamatoa, Dime, and be prep if board needs to be reset. If they're just playing a heavy control or they just need to basically finish the game with the Tamatoa and the Dime. So that's all they're doing, and of course, looking at that objectively, your turns to win the matchup or to really flip it into your favor is to get some work done in the earlier turns, and that's why Ruby Sapphire just struggles with decks like Hyper Aggro, of course, because it wants to be spending them early turns on ramp, whilst Hyper Aggro is just going to turn sideways and quest for large amounts of very cheap characters. Of course, they can always bring it back if they could get to their top end quick enough and play like a Sisu or something, or just massively tempo swing the way back, and they're not that far behind on the lore race. And of course, they've struggled with Flynn and Sisu combo from Ruby Amethyst. That's another one they don't like seeing, just because it's a two-turn combo. Turn 2, they play Flynn. Turn 3, they play Sisu, and it's instantly there to say, well, whilst you're ramping, I also require you to answer this, or I'm just going to be gaining very large amounts of lore whilst you do your game plan. But outside of that, it feels like they have a very good game into everything. Mentioning those two game plans of turning sideways, you would assume that a deck like Amber Steel would actually have a good matchup into it, especially on paper. How I would say Amber Steel plays a lot of two questers and they turn sideways, but the issue with that is they replenish their hand using a whole new world, and the one thing Ruby Sapphire can struggle with, or it struggles with, and then it tries to deal with that struggle with using Hiram and scrying cards to keep its hand size up. But with Amber Steel, they are going to be playing the whole new world and replenishing the Ruby Sapphire player's hand, and they know that card's going to come out, so they can sometimes use the Quill that's in their deck to just build up high inks and then expect the whole new world, or whatever. And Sisu just resets the hand, resets the board, does a really good job there. Of course, B Prep as well does an amazing job. There's cards like Pete and stuff like that, but if you're using Sisu Ice Block, it doesn't matter too much. So yeah, that is the issues that Ruby Sapphire mainly faces. Is it has a resource issue, and it has just early game pressure with actual on the board and lore and stopping characters from questing for lore and stuff like that. So that's the ways you can sort of abuse that deck and try and win. Of course, bringing Blue Steel into that, we are also a deck that plays Whole New World, so you can see that sometimes that matchup doesn't go that great. It tends to be one of our worst matchups, if not our worst. I don't think actually I'd put anything else above that. Maybe Fasses sometimes was a bit more struggling, but I think Ruby Sapphire has always been the menace to us. So the way we can sort of play into that is, of course, for starters, a no wheel version I think does incredibly better than the wheel version, because it means we're not going to replenish their hand. We're not going to play. It's not going to be their full resources are reset. They're always going to have to be looking for the ways that they can draw cards, and of course sometimes they don't draw the Hirams and they don't draw the cards they want, and if they do, they have to scry for them with visions and the Tala, and tempo wise we're just way too far ahead and winning the game. But of course, if you want to play the whole new world version, you can sometimes just quill the whole new world. Sometimes what you can do is bait them a little bit. They might go, right, it looks very much like the card they have in hand is whole new world. They're setting up singers. I'm going to use quill and ramp down. And when they play whole new world, I'll benefit from that because I've used the quill. But of course, you can be holding a Hiram or holding any card, and it's not a whole new world, and they've just quilled most of their hand away, and you can lean on that. So there's a bit of an ebb and flow with the fight on how you want to use whole new world. I find in the matchup that bait does sort of work sometimes, but a lot of their most current lists with just Porp Tippo, into Tyler or Hiram, how far you go, that they tend to just have consistent card draw and consistent ramp. So the bait is a real last ditch effort if you see them doing an early quill and starting to, ramp and dump their hand and you're not seeing a Hiram and you're not seeing a Porpsicle out. Shouldn't be a game plan like you jump into them. Don't go into the matchup thinking this is how I'm going to win the matchup. But if you see the moment where they really are anticipating a whole new world, you can pull back on that, and you can maybe even just sit on the whole new world in your hand. You don't have to quill it away and be like, I'll use this when I've set up my board and took as much advantage from my hand, and I'll have to use it. On the play, I think into Ruby Sapphire, you still have the ability to just go over them. You know they're not an Emerald deck, so they're never going to take the whole new world from your hand. They're not an Emerald and Amber deck. They're never going to take it from your hand. If you're just going to play a consistent Port, Smee, Quill into a Sing Wheel, and then Flood with Pete and Aerial and stuff like that, I don't see why you can't go over them most times. They might answer your board, and sadly, they will have better answers than, say, Ruby Amethyst will, which is the perfect deck to just completely go over them with a whole new world. But on the play, I think that's absolutely fine. You can achieve that, and sometimes that is the game plan to go for if you see the cards line up that way. Because you just don't want to be sat with like dead whole new worlds and you didn't draw a Hiram to draw you any cards. So yeah, on the play, I think that's fine. On the draw, that can be a bit of a struggle, especially if they're getting the ramp off first. They're going first. They're going to hit the bigger stuff quicker than you are going to hit it. And basically, it's going to be that ebb and flow of whatever you play, they'll react to quite easily, and then leave a Maleficent Dragon on the board or a Sisu on the board or something like that. So really, there is an ebb and flow of that. And I think entirely as well saying you struggle so much on the draw with that matchup because you can't go over them as easily with the whole new world. This is a matchup that you walk away with a 1-1 from in a DLC or anything like that, or any 2-game format events. I wouldn't be upset about that. That's pretty much. It's not the best result you can get, but it's very expected and a very positive result, I think, if you can walk away with a 1-1. You'd hope to not face that many in an event, so you can get your 2-0s elsewhere. I think you could 2-0 majority of the rest of the room. But yeah, getting those 1-1s from Ruby Sapphire, I think, is absolutely fine. Especially what I'm trying to say is a DLC, if you get one, don't be rocked by that. That's a really expected result and a pretty decent one for you. The Ruby Sapphire player would definitely be looking at this matchup as a 2-0 for them. So you walking away the 1-1's fine. And of course, if you're able to get the 2-0, take that as well. So yeah, the only other part I'd say, that's how to use the whole new world, sorry. The other parts is, of course, we don't have an ability to go completely wide. We still need to be ramping because we've actually got a lot of our deck tied up in the top end of the mana count with the Tamatoa and our Dime and our Aerials. So we still need to be hitting them ramps. But a Smee on 2 is very strong in the matchup. It's a card I think most Ruby Sapphire players say they hate seeing. It's going to turn sideways in Quest. It's going to be very awkward for them to remove it. Sadly, with Tippo, that's got a little bit easier because it will quest twice to get 4 lore, and then Tippo can run it into it. If you can use a Porpsicle to keep it alive and basically force a Maui to clear it, or force just any awkward removal, like finding an Ice Block Sisu or something like that, or an Ice Block Brawl, or not, yeah, double Ice Block Sisu, or an Ice Block and a Brawl. That's pretty good for you. That's just going to be massively negative tempo for them. They don't really like that. And the Smee got some lore locked in. So definitely Smee on 2 is like really good because that's one benefit we have from playing the Steel package instead of the Ruby package, that we get Smee and we can get a 2-quester out. We can get a 2-quester out on turn 2, start turning sideways, get some lore, and then later on in the game, when we're going to end up eventually losing the board because we are a Steel deck versus a Ruby deck. Sadly, if it gets to the later stages of the game, which will happen with these ramp decks, you're just going to lose the board because Steel can't hold it as easily. You can fight for the board, of course, but things like Tinkerbell, Grab Your Swords, Baboom, Fire the Cannons just aren't going to be enough control compared to cards like Be Prepared, Sisu, and Maleficent. So once we get to those later stages, we just want to basically find the final win with a Dime and Aerials and Pete's. And Pete's another card we get that we get and Ruby doesn't get. So we can get things like Aerial and Pete to stick. Area can also force be prepared because they'll have no other answer for it. They won't be playing Tremaines. They won't have any other way to deal with it until she's turned sideways and quested. So definitely, yeah, you can use your aerials as a bit to your advantage. Majority of the time, you want her to get you lore. But if you play her on the board, it's instantly going to start putting the question in the head of maybe I should play a be prepared, because otherwise you could theoretically get 10 lore that turn if you are to also find the dime. But yeah, once we get into the later stages of the game, we want to be closing the game out as quick as we can. So once I think it's the point where you want the game to end is the sort of first stage of late game. So you can start putting stuff like aerials and Tamatoas and maybe the Tamatoa stick as well if you've wheeled some of their resources or they just haven't drawn into them. Um, so definitely, yeah, that's another benefit. And the only other thing we have to, I would say, cards like Let It Go and Hades, they are basically there just to sort of quiet the flames of the late game stages because we don't have any steel removal that's good to deal with a Tamatoa. We use a card like Let It Go, but of course, I mean, in my opinion, and I think probably most people's opinions, Let It Go isn't as good as just Maleficent or something like that. It's giving them one ink. We didn't get a character on board. Yeah, it's a little bit cheaper and it is a song so you can sing it, but overall I think I'd rather have a Maleficent in the deck than I would have Let It Go, but that's just the way the colour pairings have sort of landed for us. Yeah, the only other things we have is we are a fair bit quicker than them because of Smee. Whole New Worlds have just basically run over them on the play. On the draw, you can try and do that, but you have to make sure that they haven't hit Quill down, and they're not running ahead with the game. But overall, yeah, we just want to play a Smee early on, start getting some questing lore in, and then whilst we are verging into the later stages of the game, we want to just close it out as quick as we can because once they get Hiram down, it's going to guarantee two card draw like it does when you play it, but it's unlikely you're going to be able to kill it as well the turn it's played. So it's most likely going to get them four, and then even when it's exerted, it's six attack power, which is quite a bit of a struggle for us to do to them, whilst they can just play a brawler and Medusa and just win on that advantage. So definitely. Smee down, Quill is way better than Mickey in this matchup. Mickey is almost irrelevant. The only time I'd say Mickey would be alright is again if you're on the play and you just need to ramp to the 5 and you want to do the whole new world, go over them route, and hopefully the next card you draw is a Quill in that 7 new cards and you can start getting your ramp going because they just play a lot more ramp cards than us. So we really need to utilize the Quill as much as we can. And then all of the cheaper removal, only time I'd ever use those cards, they're not for this matchup, is to just basically stop a Tipo from being awkward because that one damage wherever they want is actually quite awkward. But yeah, you can always do steel maps as well if you're just trying to think if I play a grab your swords, Tinkerbell, and then I baboom, I can kill X, Y, Z. So definitely do that if you see those lines working up, but also don't overinvest into them because as I say, Tinkerbell, grab your swords, and a baboom is actually quite an expensive thing to do if you're just going to kill a Hiram. But then most likely we'll just play another one straight afterwards. But yeah, that's the only things I can really say. The tips on Ruby Sapphire. Just try and get that Smee onto, try and get the Quill going, and just try and close the game out as quick as you can, and just try and play the aggressor in the matchup. And again, just don't be upset if you get a 1-1 from it. If you can only beat them on the play, I think you're absolutely fine. If you in practice could get consistently beating them on the play, that's absolutely fine, I think. So yeah, there's just the little tips I have, and this build is one I'm testing out recently.